Welcome. Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please check out our other videos and don't forget to like and subscribe. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence the community and the world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit us at oaktreechurch.com. There you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process that we call The Path. Now enjoy this message. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or the website contact form. Thank you.
During announcements there, when Gary had come up, I ran back to my office really quick, grabbed a cough drop so I could choke on it. Exactly, because I can't do two things at one time. So teaching and trying to not die, I think, is going to be a problem. Apologize for my voice this morning. I came back up, sat down, and someone had nicely put a cough drop right there on my laptop for me already. So that was cool. Having a few technical difficulties this morning. My laptop apparently still thinks it's in Africa, doesn't know what to do with this setup here, has not seen it for a month. So look a little bit different on the screen and on the stream this morning, a little bit. Over our next several weeks together, we're going to be doing this study on the real Jesus. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of Jesuses presented in this world, right? There's a lot of fake news, a lot of false information about who Jesus is in this world. And so let me give you just a brief outline of where we're going throughout this study. There are 4 parts to it. We're not going to do just 4 weeks, but there are 4 parts to it. Here's where we're going, okay? Just so you know, here's where we're going. There are 4 parts to this overall study. Like I said, this is not 4 weeks. We're not just doing one part each week. There's a lot of detail in each of these. But basically today, I want to cover this introduction and the big question that drives this whole study, which is, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And we see that in Matthew chapter 16. After the introduction, there are 3 big parts. We're just going to break down the life of Jesus into 3 big parts. Jesus does not, human Jesus begins at conception, but there's a whole lot of the second person of the Trinity that goes all the way back to eternity past. So part 1 is actually pre-incarnation, before Christmas, okay? So from eternity past until he is conceived in Mary, what was his activity? What did he do? How do we know? What are some of the things that we should know about him? We don't call him Jesus back then because that's his human name, but for simplicity, what was Jesus doing back then before his conception? And then I want to break down after his conception, we call his incarnation, into 2 parts, brilliantly called part 1 and part 2, okay? Part 1 is what we would call his earthly life, his earthly ministry from conception until he ascends into heaven in Acts chapter 1. And then part 2 is, after his ascension, what is he doing now? I mean, he's not on earth right now, so what is he doing now, and what is he going to do in the future? So, literally, this series covers the whole book. Okay? And we'll hop around throughout the course of this study together. But I want to start with this introduction, who do you say that I am? And really, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, he started with a different question, not whom do you say that I am, but Jesus came to the area of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, who do people? What are people saying about me? Right? What do people say about me? And that's really where I want to focus our time this morning. So, what that means is that this morning, and this morning only in this study, we're not going to spend a lot of time in the Bible, okay? I hate saying that. I never like to say that when I'm teaching, right? I always want to spend time in the Bible. But for this particular message, the question is not what does the Bible say about Jesus, but what do people say about Jesus? Okay? We need to get this introduction, get this out of the way so that then we can answer the real question is what does the Bible say? Okay? So, see, I create these slides to help me go through and then I just talk over them and I forget. Basically, if you think about most of the world religions, and I don't know how up you are on world religions, we'll look at some of these this morning, but most religions have something to say about Jesus, okay? Atheism, God doesn't exist. Agnosticism, we don't know if God exists. We don't really know if we can know him. But that's why I put it this way, all people or all religions who actually acknowledge his existence, okay? That's our group. Who actually do acknowledge that Jesus did exist, place him into one of three categories, okay? And if you thought through this for just a minute, you could probably come up with these categories on your own, but we'll walk through them here together. Number one, Jesus was a good man, right? Jesus was a good man. He was a great moral teacher, had some really good things to say, maybe even a prophet of some God or some religion out there, but we are going to limit him to his humanity. Just a good man, just a moral teacher, a great teacher. We see this in Buddhism and we see this in Islam, okay? In Buddhism, it's not really gods, right? Buddhism is a pantheistic or even a panentheistic religion where this divine spark is in all of us. You've probably heard this more and more recently. It really goes back even as far as Carl Sagan, a little bit beyond him or before him, but this idea that we are all stardust. You heard that? We're all stardust. Did you know that a star had to die so that you could come into the world? Does that make you feel special? Well, if that's all you have, then maybe it makes you feel special, right? We are just stardust. And when we die, we just disappear back into the universe, right? Man, that is Buddhism. That is Buddhism, right? I mean, that is the basis right there of just this, whether you believe in Buddhism usually teaches a reincarnation, okay? I read a joke yesterday. I just thought it was hilarious. The second largest Buddhist temple in the world is actually in New Jersey. Okay, the second largest Buddhist temple in the world is in New Jersey. That's not the joke part. The joke part is Buddhist scholars are convinced that this temple was terrible in its previous life, which is why it had to reincarnate into New Jersey. But this idea where we just have to keep getting better and better. You know what I've always found interesting about Buddhism is that humans always reincarnate into something less than human. Have you noticed that? Okay? We talk about, I was a butterfly in a former life, but you don't remember your former life, okay? And so you don't know if you were a butterfly in a former life. You don't even know if you had a former life. This might be your first life. But when you die and your grandson or your granddaughter sees a butterfly, they're like, oh, grandma and grandpa. Why is it that we are not humans in our reincarnation? Why is it, think about this, I'm believe it or not, I am being serious here. Why is it that we seem, now I'm coming from a biblical worldview and I understand that, where humanity is the top of the creative order on earth, right? So why is it that every time we come back as smaller, we come back as animals, we come back as insects, and not humans? I think it is a perversion of what is supposed to be, okay? And Jesus is just a great teacher. He's just a great prophet. He's a moral teacher because, yes, he had a divine stardust spark in him too, but he's no different than us in that religion. In Islam, he levels at the same place. He has the same level as the other great prophets, Abraham and Moses and Muhammad and Jesus. They're all these great prophets. But in their doctrine, there is place for only one God with no different persons, no parts, no anything. And so Jesus cannot be, it's actually a blasphemous to a Muslim to say that Jesus is the Son of God. Allah cannot have a son. Okay? And so he is, again, just a good man. They highly esteem Jesus. He is the prophet. Okay, he's not Muhammad the prophet, but he's one of the great prophets of Allah. But he is not God. He's not divine in any way. But he's a great teacher, and they love his teachings. Gandhi once said, or it's at least been attributed to him, that says, I don't like Christians, but I love their Christ, because he has good teachings. I like the teachings, I just don't like his followers, because they don't seem to follow his teachings very well. That's probably true. So that's number one category. He's a good man, he's a moral teacher, good person, prophet, whatever. Number two, he was semi-divine, but not God. Okay? There's a little bit of deity in there. He's not just human. He's more than human, but he is not actually God. And I list Baha'i, Hinduism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness. Baha'i, they sort of do similar. It's an Eastern religion. They believe that he was pre-existent. Okay, now I would believe that. We would agree with that. He was pre-existent. He was already there. So some kind of divinity, but not God. Okay, we're not going to place him to the level of God, but he was pre-existent. He is a prophet, same status, similar to Islam, same status as a prophet. Of all the prophets, this is sort of like you dump all the religions into one. So Buddha was a great prophet, and Muhammad was a great prophet. So we're going to borrow from a couple of those, Moses and Abraham, and Jesus. Okay, so pre-existent can't be, he's more than human, but he's not actually God. Hinduism, well, they put him on the same level as all of their, gods and semi-gods and avatars, and just sort of put him in that collection, in that mix. Again, more than human, but not really, there's thousands of gods. You want to call him a god? Great, call him a god, but Hindu has more gods than Solomon had wives, and that's saying something. That's like, they've got thousands and thousands of gods. So, Jesus, yeah, if he wants to be in that mix, go ahead, be in the mix. Big deal, right? I wouldn't do that. Mormonism, the gods in Mormonism, and there are many, every planet has its own god, and the god of a planet was a human on another planet. And because of how good they were, they attained deity and were given their own planet to rule. Okay? This is why it's so important within Mormonism, and I know the U.S. government has sort of pushed back against this here in this country, but this is why it's so important within Mormonism to have multiple wives, for a man to have multiple wives, because ladies, you're not going to be a god, but the man can be a god, and when he gets his planet, he's going to have to populate his planet. So the more wives he can have, the more spirit children he can have, okay? It's a pretty good gig for us, I'm just saying, right? If you're looking for something to convert to, this one, you don't have to martyr yourself for the 72 virgins like you do in Islam. You can just go have your own planet. God the Father, we call God the Father, he was a human on another planet who was really, really good, who was elevated to deity, and he became the God of this planet by the superior gods. They assigned him to this planet. And so we are all spirit children of God the Father, okay, including Jesus, including Satan, all spirit children. Everything that we see, we're all spirit children of God the Father. Which makes us, most people when they're trying to disparage Mormonism, like it needs help. But they say, because in Mormonism, Jesus and Satan are brothers. And it's that shock value, right? That, Jesus and Satan are brothers. Well, because in Mormonism, we're all brothers and sisters, because we're all spirit children of the same Father. So I could even do a shock value and say, Satan is your brother, right? Because it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Satan is your brother. Jesus is your brother. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all spirit children of God the Father. Jesus, yeah, he's sort of divine, but he's certainly not God. He's certainly not God, okay? What I don't understand is why he doesn't have his own planet. Right? I mean, if he's so good, right? If he was so good, why doesn't he get his own planet? Why is he stuck here with us? Right? I actually have a better chance of getting a planet than Jesus does, apparently, in Mormonism, which doesn't make sense to me. Okay, I'll take it, but it doesn't make sense to me. Okay? Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah's Witness. In this religion, in this belief system, Jesus, again, is not God, but he was the first thing that God created. Okay? And then he created everything else. All right? So we are Jesus' creation, and we would agree with that. We'll look at that in our study. Jesus is the creator. Okay? The Bible is clear that Jesus is the creator, no question. But he is not a created being. In Jehovah's Witness, God the Father created Jesus first, and then he created everything else. As we go through the Old Testament, Jehovah's Witness would say every time that the angel Michael shows up, that's actually Jesus. He just goes by Michael in the Old Testament. He's the archangel because he's the chief of all of the things, apparently, that God created. And that's why Michael doesn't really show up in the New Testament. Except, wait, Michael does show up in the New Testament alongside Jesus. So now he's got a split personality? I don't know. I don't understand. We're not trying to make sense. We're just trying to make theology. Okay, we're trying to make a belief system. So, again, what do people say? Jesus asked the question. Of course, their answers, verse 14 over there, some say John the Baptist. That was really interesting because we could sort of put that into the Buddhism category because John the Baptist had already been beheaded at this point, which means that Jesus was reincarnated. It's not just John the Baptist resurrected, because he's obviously not John the Baptist. If you knew him before, doesn't look like him, talk like him, so he must have come back as Jesus. Herod really liked this one because he thought that John the Baptist had come back to haunt him. It's a really funny story. Herod had John killed, and he really liked John. He liked listening to John as long as he stayed out of Herod's marriage, which is why John was killed. And when Herod heard about Jesus, he's like, John the Baptist is back to haunt me. And it's just a funny line in the book of Matthew. I think it's funny. It's hilarious. But that's where that comes from, okay? All right? Jesus is the reincarnation, essentially, not just a resurrection, but a reincarnation. Others say Elijah, the same thing, because Elijah the prophet is supposed to come back, according to Malachi chapter 4, before Messiah. Before Messiah comes, Elijah the prophet has to come back and preach and prepare the way for Messiah. And because they had already rejected Jesus as Messiah and said, well, you're a great prophet, you're a good man, maybe you are Elijah. Okay? Others say Jeremiah, others say one of the other prophets. That's where these categories come from. The problem is, this is a 2,000-year-old question that people are still wrestling with today. Who's Jesus? Who's Jesus? Well, he's a good guy. Good teacher, has some good stuff to say. Well, he was not quite God, but man, he was like up there. Wow, like really, really close. The third group actually admit Jesus is God. They actually admit Jesus is God. Now, we may have some differences with what we believe with them. Let me skip the first one for a moment and say Seventh-day Adventist, Orthodox, all of the different Orthodoxies, and Roman Catholicism all teach that he is God. He is part of the Trinity. I would say that all three of those are actually Orthodox in that area of their doctrine. Lots of other things I would disagree with, but in that area, they do actually believe Jesus is God. He is a member of the Trinity. Okay, so three distinct persons in the Godhead that make up one God. They share God's they share the same nature and everything. Oneness Pentecostal is a little different because they still hold to an ancient heresy, something that the early church called a heresy very early on, it was presented by a guy by the name of Sabellius, and so it's called Sabellianism or modalism. And basically what modalism teaches and what Oneness Pentecostal teaches is that, yes, Jesus is God, and yes, there is one God, not three gods, but this God does not have three distinct persons. There is no Trinity. There's no tri-unity. There's no Godhead. There's just God. And sometimes he appears or shows up as the Father. And sometimes he shows up as the Son. And sometimes he shows up as the Spirit. But they're all actually the same. And he just appears based on what he thinks the situation calls for. Okay? Well, the early church shot that down very, very early on, but it still persists. In fact, Jehovah's Witness holds to another heresy that the early church shot down very early, called Arianism, and that's that idea that he was the first created being. Okay, so Arius taught that, Sabellius taught this. These are things that the early church took care of. I'm talking like 1700 years ago. And they said, this is wrong. And yet today, 2024, 21st century, people still hold to these same wrong beliefs about Jesus. This is a 2,000-year-old question, but it is not done. It is not a question. It's a question that has been answered, but it's a question that continues to be asked, even though we have the answer that is so plain. So we have this idea of Oneness Pentecostal. Now, one thing that I don't have, I really did not put, I didn't put it up here. This is one more that's sort of a subset of He is God, okay? And that is, whereas the first group said He's not God at all, He's only human, which is wrong. This subset of the He is God is called docetism, and it comes from the Greek word that means to seem or to appear, okay? And what they teach, and there's still people today believes, they teach is that He is God, no question He is God, we would agree with that, but He's not human. He just appeared as human, sort of like an angel might show up and look like human, but He's still an angel. They believe the same thing about Jesus, okay? It's not as widely spread, okay, because it's a whole lot easier to say Jesus was human and not God, but there are still some who say Jesus is God, but He's not human at all. He just appeared. He just seemed to be human, but He's not. Well, I have a question then. How does Jesus die? Because God cannot die, right? If Jesus only appeared to be human, how did he die? Well, he only appeared to die. That's great. Doesn't make my salvation feel very secure if my whole salvation is based on just, smoke and mirrors. Not feeling really secure at this point, right? Okay, there's a reason that things had to happen the way they did, God and man together, and we'll explore that over the next several weeks. I just wanted this morning, I just wanted to think through some of these things because I'm sure you've heard some of these, okay? Maybe not, in these exact categories or whatever, but you've heard this stuff. You know this stuff. Like I said, you probably could have come up with these same categories. This is not new information. But we know that it's out there. People are still asking the question, who is Jesus? And I think we have the answer. I think we're the ones, not like Oak Tree's the only ones with the answer, but I think biblical Christians are the only ones with the correct answer. And there are still people asking. And so we have the answer in verse 16, biblical Christianity. Jesus asked Peter, so who do you say? Okay, fine. That's what everybody else says. Who do you say that I am? And Peter jumped up, and he's like that in-your-face type A personality type guy, and he was like, I know who you are. Pick me, right? Okay, great. The world needs people like that. The church needs people like that. He said, you are the Christ. And in Matthew especially, because Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, the word Christ is the Greek word that matches. It's the same word in Hebrew as Mashiach, right? You've heard me say that before. It just means the anointed one. You are the Messiah. You are the one we've been waiting for. You are what he's saying when he says you are the Christ, even before we get to Son of God. What he's saying is you are the hope of our nation. You are the one that the prophets talked about. You are the one we've been waiting for. You are everything that we've been looking for generations. You're the Messiah. And Peter didn't know about Savior of the world yet. We would put that in there with hindsight. You are the Messiah. We would add you are Savior of the world. But he did add the Son of the living God, which I have to tell you, and even with my banked up minutes, we don't have all the time that I could go into this morning. But man, I'm telling you, that phrase right there, Son of the living God, that is why Jesus said, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. Because the concept, Son of the living God, that was still, much like Islam and some of these other religions, that's a little foreign to Judaism at this stage. Okay, to say that God has a son. Now, I can prove the Trinity from the Old Testament. That's not a question. I'm not saying it's not in there, but it's not nearly as clear in the Old Testament as it is in the New Testament. Okay, and we will. We'll go to the Old Testament starting next week because, Jesus isn't born yet. It's not Christmas, right? So we'll be in the Old Testament and we'll see some of these things. He is alive and active in the Old Testament before he's conceived in Mary. But for Peter to say the Son of the living God, that's like, there's so much packed into that one little verse, one little statement. For him to be able to say that, okay? I could see him saying that after the resurrection, after the church began. I could see him saying that today. But to say it back then, that's really, really amazing. That's really awesome, okay? That is the answer. Because most people, with 8 billion people on this planet today, some people estimate 2 billion are Christians. I question that number. Okay, I question that number, but let's go with it, just because it's easy math anyway. If there are 8 billion people on the planet today and 2 billion of us are actually believers in Jesus, that means 75% of the population of our planet are still asking this question, who is Jesus? Or at least, even if they're not asking, they don't have the answer. They don't know the answer to this question. And it seems from our side, like it should be a pretty simple answer, right? I mean, Peter just popped off in one verse and said it. Okay? That's why it's so important to do what we do. That's why personally, I go teach 60 students in Africa because they are going to change their continent by sharing the gospel. They're going to take this question and they're going to share it in 5 countries to people who have never heard this answer before. And so when I have one of these students come to me and say, you know what, before this, I thought I knew who Jesus was. As I teach this material, as I teach them about Jesus, and then I teach the book of Matthew, and he's just standing there on the sidewalk with me. He's like, I have to tell you, let me tell you my story. And he told me his story, how he got to Word of Life. He was a member of an 18-person military unit that he asked if he could take a quick leave to go home for something and then come back. While he was gone, all 17 members of his unit were killed in a bombing. He said, I have no way to explain that except God protected me. God wanted me here at Word of Life so that I could go back home to South Sudan. Because they're still at war too. I didn't mention that. There's wars all over the world. They just don't get the news cycles like some of these do. That's why we do what we do, right? That's why you do what you do. It's why I do what I do. Because we're the ones who have the answer. Who is Jesus? And there are a lot of people who aren't even asking, and they need to be. But the ones who are, and Gary reminds us of this a lot when he's teaching, and he did again these last couple of weeks. That's why we have to be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks about the hope that is in us. Sometimes that is, how can you be calm in a world that is falling apart? Sometimes that is, hey, tell me about your Jesus. The question looks different each time, but we need to be able to have the answer. So the rest of this series the rest of this study is going to answer these 2 questions. So what does that mean? What does that mean that he is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God? And where does the Bible teach that? Again, did not spend a lot of time in here today, just a couple of verses in Matthew chapter 16. We'll spend a lot of time in the Bible over the course of this study together, okay? Not where do I teach that, not where do we just come up with this, but where does the Bible teach that? And one final thought as we wrap up this morning, and this brings it back to the path, because it's a reminder to all of us that in 2 Peter chapter 1, where we find the path, Peter tells us at the end of this list of 8 qualities, add to your faith these 7 things, right? Again, I hope that most of you can rattle these off by now. Hopefully you do more than just rattle them off, but actually think through them, right? At the end of these, he says, if these things are really yours and continually increasing, right? It's not just a checklist. It's not just something that we do once and we're good. Continually increasing, truly yours. They will keep you from becoming ineffective and unproductive in, here it is, your pursuit of knowing our Lord Jesus Christ more intimately. Because that's our goal. The goal is not just to be better people. The goal is not to world peace. The goal is not all of these things that everybody else wants. The goal is, for a believer, chase Jesus. Chase Jesus. Pursue him daily so that we can know him better and love him more, right? That's why we do what we do.